1815, 200 years ago exactly. Many people think Waterloo at the moment, just finished celebrating or commemorating the Battle of Waterloo. But actually in 1815 in Indonesia, a volcano exploded, 70,000 people died, and it created an ash cloud so big that there was no summer in Europe in 1816. And that happened to be the time when Mary Shelley was in Switzerland, and she was stuck indoors, and her and her friends embarked in a horror writing story, and what we got out of it was the book Frankenstein. And Frankenstein was the first science fiction novel. There were science fiction stories before that, but not in a full book kind of novel format. And that's a bit like where we are today, hence the laboured kind of intro, in data analytics. We're at a kind of a precipice where it feels like we're playing God with people's data, that we're actually creating monsters, and then potentially we're going to abandon those monsters like Victor Frankenstein did to his monster. And so the progress of analytics and data is not necessarily a technical one, it's actually quite an ethical one. And it's the difference between what we should do with consumer and users' data versus what we can do. Because we can do pretty much anything today. And the trouble that we have is legislation doesn't keep up. So the Data Protection Act, the EU Privacy Directive, none of these things at the moment are fit for purpose. Just like the copyright laws, like everything, technology is moving too fast for legislation to keep up. And that's an ethical challenge for marketers. We are all data, basically. We're all ones and zeros, not our physical selves. But when we go online, we just leave a trail of breadcrumbs, an exhaust fume of data moving behind us. And anyone can analyze that data. In the UK alone, the DVLA, the NH, which runs the driving licenses, HMRC, which is the IRS in the UK, and the NHS all sell data to people, all government bodies. No legislation is keeping up with that. No one knows what's being sold, but it happens all the time. And if you ever see a presentation about data, everyone will talk about big data. But basically, yes, there is more data in the world, and yes, it will get to 35 zettabytes by 2020, whatever the hell that means. But the reality when you're working in marketing is that insight doesn't scale with all that data. In fact, it's more costly and time consuming, and we have less people, we have less good analysts than we have money. So it's really difficult to keep up, and actually our ability to extract insight will not scale with the amount of data that's out there. In marketing, so marketing really is about capitalism, it's about growth and profit. And data analytics is the most hardcore form of capitalism there is. So I think marketing is, we talk a lot about the altruism of the advertising industry this week, but lots of marketing is about making money for our clients, profit and growth. So we turn data into information, into knowledge, into wisdom, but ultimately if we don't turn it into profit for our clients, then what's the point of doing all the rest of it? That puts analysts in a very challenged position because they're being told to maximize profit at the same time where people are riding roughshod over consumers' rights and their data and their privacy. So marketing is fairly behind though when it comes to analytics. I'd say professional sports has more data analytics than marketing does at the moment. So even though we have the first Cannes Lions for data creativity today, tomorrow, there's a long way to go. And if you look at the best work that we've done in data analytics, it's got nothing really to do with marketing. First example here is for Thomson Reuters, where we built a hurricane prediction model that identified where hurricanes would move as they occurred in the Gulf. We then overlaid geospatial data around where the oil fields are, where the refineries are, where the boats are, the tankers. And this is in the Thomson Reuters terminal, and it's used for spot pricing opportunities for traders. So if they know a hurricane is going to disrupt supply of oil, that creates a spot pricing opportunity for those traders. So immediately jump to profit. No worrying about the wisdom and knowledge. It's just about short-term pricing opportunities. Hardcore capitalism using data analytics. It also includes a lot of good and great UX and design, and taking what is a really complex thing to do, to model the weather, which is a chaotic system, and turn it into something that someone can actually use to make pricing and buying decisions in real time. So I think, a fabulous thing that we've done. The UX guys, the designers, programmers, the analysts all come together to do something pretty amazing. Another thing we built, which is for dark grocery stores. So a dark store is a grocery store that you're not allowed to enter, only staff are allowed to enter, and they pick your e-commerce basket and get it sent to your door. And the thing is that the end user benefit we're looking for is how can you make that faster? How can you deliver people's groceries faster to them? And in a shorter window. There's a real user benefit to doing both of those things. So for one of our big grocery clients, we built an algorithm that minimizes the path around the store by moving all the products around for the pickers. so they can pick our goods as fast as possible and deliver them to consumers, giving that brand a competitive advantage in delivering e-commerce. Again, not really marketing, but use of analytics to drive consumer benefit immediately. As you can see from this store, it's a pretty depressing place to be in. It looks a bit like, it's like the uncanny valley. It looks like a grocery store, but it's something uglier and darker. And I wanted to use this image, but it's not high enough res. But if you work at a place where it says a great place to work on the wall, it probably isn't a great place to work. And this, what I can only presume to be palette box, blue pallets here, reminds me of the final scenes of the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the Ark of the Covenant is disappeared into a big dark room. So these guys have a terrible life. I think working in a dark store is a pretty hardcore place to have your job. So the 8 things I talked about, I've numbered them so you can see what they are. The first thing is, in marketing analytics, there are things that we know. They're law-like rules that always happen regardless. And as a data analyst, you already know these things, so it's easy to apply them to our job. So the first thing is, the more you do something, the more likely you are to do it again. So starting off with drugs. So in a survey of 12th graders in the US, we looked at how much cannabis, ecstasy, and coke. And I'll start with coke, which is slightly ironic because most of them started with cannabis and moved on to coke. But of all the 12th graders, about 5% have taken coke by the time they get to the 12th grade. But of all the people who have taken coke, 50% of them go on to take it multiple times, 3 to 5 times. And of all the people who have taken it 3 to 5 times, 60% go on to take it 6 to 9 times. And of all the people who have taken it 6 to 9 times, 70% take it more than that. So the more you do it, the more likely you are to do it again. Across 3 different drug types, the same pattern exists. So slightly less controversially, extramarital affairs. The more affairs you have, the more likely to have more affairs. So in a Psychology Today study, 25% of married couples said they'd had an extramarital affair. Of all the people who had an extramarital affair, 80% of them had another one. Apologies for the kind of flaccid nature of this line. I wanted to get it really erect and upright, but people run out of energy by the time they get to here. And so it's hard to get more than 3 or 4 affairs at a time. However, there's a slide later on that disproves that slightly, so I'll point that out when it comes. But the more affairs you have, the more likely you are to have more affairs. And today, I first did this in April, so forgive me, but where we are today, you can see there's a likelihood of how likely you are to break up throughout the year. And when I first did this, we were in a kind of safe period. We're back into a medium risk kind of period again now, the summer holiday. But you can see, I wonder why spring break causes so many breakups. I don't understand that. As an analyst, it doesn't make sense to me as I'm visiting our Miami office. The other thing I thought was interesting was April Fool's Day. Now, is that like April Fool's Day jokes gone wrong that have caused breakups? I'm not sure why that's such a peak. And then obviously, any of us spend a lot of time with our family. We know what happens. We start falling out with each other and that. So, there's a likelihood it's different at different times of the year. So recidivism is repeat crime. Again, the more times you go to jail, the more likely you are to go back to jail again. If you're a really bad data analyst, you would say jails cause crime. And you do meet some kind of nefarious people in jails often. But obviously, if you're more of a career criminal, you're more likely to repeat offend. So this is likelihood to repeat offend after being released within a year. So you can see the more times you've been in jail, the more likely you're going to go back again. Going on to more kind of marketing things, the more times you go to a website, the more likely you are to return to a website. The hardest part is getting people from 0 to 1, but then 1 to 2. Once they've got someone to a website 3 or 4 times, it's easy to get them to come back because their likelihood to come back across all of these brands is kind of 80-90%. And you can see despite how diverse some of the sectors are, the same pattern happens everywhere. Being an analyst is pretty easy because I know these patterns exist every time. But I can show them to people like you and goes, wow, that's amazing. But it always occurs. If you look at actual buying, the more times you buy from a company, the more likely you are to buy again. The trick of this is actually most loyalty programs are targeted at people who are very likely to buy anyway. And therefore, on the surface, they look really profitable. But the reality is you're not creating a hell of a lot of incremental uplift from loyalty. The key point where you can have most difference on a customer's lifetime value is right at the start. Because that's the lowest repeat purchase. And at this point, people haven't formed their behaviors. Once you form behaviors, it's really hard to break behaviors. And actually, most people have done things once or twice, very few people. So the challenge for most brands is how do I get, there's 100 times more people who've never visited your website, But then once I visit the website, most of your visitors are one-time visitors. So the biggest opportunity for growth is how do I get people from 1 to 2 to 3? Very few companies worry about that. They worry about how can I create a loyalty program for these guys who are going to come back anyway. So why is the world full of loyalty programs? There's very little published data about the success of loyalty programs, how much true profit was generated. The only place you can normally find public data around loyalty programs, apart from when loyalty program agencies do press releases, the only other time they say they all work, obviously. And I'm not picking on Marriott here, but this is straight from their annual report, and it says we've got 45 million members, so what? Accounting for more than half of our rooms, so what? And 1% account for more than 30% of room nights. Okay, there's nothing about performance in there. There's nothing about profit or growth or anything that's actually useful to an investor. If loyalty programs did work, that information would have said there's a higher frequency of purchase per customer, there's a higher proportion of repeat customers, assuming the acquisition is level, there's lower defection, and there's increased market share. The reality is all hotel chains have very similar loyalty programs. They don't do any incremental benefit to anyone. And that's why when Airbnb come along and eat their lunch, they're not prepared for it because they've been making profit thinking that they're being really successful when they're doing a good job, but someone has disrupted their category. Any form of optimization will always be trumped by disruption. So that's number one. Number two, the longer you leave it, this is me, my wife talking to me, the longer you leave it, the less likely it will ever happen, whether it's the lawn or any kind of chore I have to do. Again, the longer it goes, and since you last committed a crime, the less likely you are to commit another crime. So recidivism follows this perfectly, and it goes over time. And guess what? The same is true for websites. The longer it takes, the less likely you are to come back. So a lot of marketing is about pulling forward, doing things faster. The reason why real time is so important is because the longer it goes since you abandon that basket, the less likely we can bring you back. And again, all websites look exactly the same. It's kind of human nature. Number three, lots of customers are unprofitable. There's a very famous Italian man called Vilfredo Pareto, and he said that 80% of a company's economic output comes from 20% of the population. And since that day, people have just reduced it to the 80-20 rule, and you hear it in all walks of life. It's rarely true in marketing. It's normally more like a 65-20 rule for marketing, but we say 80-20. So if you line up your customers from most valuable to least valuable and plot this line, what you'll see is that the top 20% account for 65% of revenue. So not all customers are created equal. But the problem with this is revenue is not a very good measure for this. If you think of a fashion brand, an online-only fashion brand, they have huge returns. If anything like my wife, she'll buy 3 of something and return the 2 sizes that don't fit. So even though you record up front £200 of sales, €200 of sales, the actual profit coming back is not, because you have to pay for the shipping, the return shipping, the products that weren't sold. And also it cost money to acquire my wife as a customer. There we go. So if you take off returns, if you take off the cost of acquisition of a customer and you plot that against customer profit, what you soon find is you get these Pareto effects. 15% of customers generate all your revenue, and the other 85% just net off because they never make any more money than it costs to acquire them, and then all the net returns. And that's why the Pareto effect is kind of wrong. It's not right for marketing the 80-20. We should think more like 100-20. One of our clients is actually 199. So 99% of their profits come from 1% of customers. It's a gaming company. So it's not a weird luxury brand, it's a gaming company. But some people spend so much money, that's where they make all their money from. They need to handhold this few group of people because they make all the profits for the business. So number 4, segmentation. Again, an anarchic part of direct marketing that we still use today. Segmentation is redundant in digital. No one is a segment. This is a management consultancy segmentation I found on the internet. I just randomly found the first one I could find. This is the problem. The problem with segmentation is it accentuates the differences between groups when the groups themselves may be quite similar to each other, but all you ever read is the differences. So I'll just quickly run through this. So this is about North American business flyers. So Sky Warriors, MISI means mutually exclusive, complete and exhaustive. But these guys are 5.6 business trips a year, most international business trips. You go to the next group, Well, they're 5.5 business trips a year and more international business trips. And these guys say, I'm a loyalty program member and I want to travel abroad. Who wants to travel abroad? So probably not a good differentiator when you're writing up a segment that's supposed to be different. And then over here, these guys want a productive flight. Who wants a productive flight? Who wants a dedicated agent on the phone? That seems a bit weird to me in this day and age. And most other things don't matter. So safety, landing on time, Kate Moss being thrown off and slowing the plane down by 2 hours. All those things don't matter. And then you've got average Joes down here. They're only 5.1 business trips. So these are 5.6, 5.5, 5.1. They're looking for lower fares, and I use airline lounges. Well, great insight. Thank you for that. And then over here, this group, 5.1 business trips, more international business trips. So basically, pretty much the same groups, just kind of spun around. And then someone's written a whole marketing plan based on attacking these different groups. And it doesn't do anything. It's a waste of time. In digital, it's kind of archaic. So no segments. Meet Nick. Nick's one of my colleagues, sits near me, technology director. Even though he's a director of technology, he wants to be an extreme athlete. So at the weekends and evenings and whenever he can, he's off doing his extreme activities. His desk is a huge bag of whey protein and an Apple Mac. And these chocolate milkshakes, which he says has 4 chicken breasts in it. I still understand what that means and how he can get them in there. He's basically a semi-pro. At the age of 38, he said to me, work's getting in the way of my athletics career now. I was like, Nick, you only do it at the weekend. You'll never be an athlete. But on a good day, he'll eat the healthiest things around. All those green liquids, any kind of good salad, he'll always eat it. But guess what? He works at Sapient, so he works late. So he has to have a nuclear dinner when everything's shut at 11 p.m. No one wants to cook from fresh at 11 p.m. So he's then settling on his kind of microwave meal. And then at the weekend, after he has a load of beers on a Friday night, like most of us, non-vegetarians, all he wants is a bacon sandwich or some form of stodge. So what segment is he in? Because he's this kind of athlete guy, he's a technology guy, but then he eats all the different foods in the store. And I think the point here is, like, we're individuals. It's very hard to codify us into segments to use it properly. And context is far more important than kind of any arbitrary demographic or behavioral variable. It's all about context. It was late at night. Why didn't we re-merchandise the store to put the late at night bestsellers to the front of the store? That means we would have sold more product. That's the solution to it, not just trying to push healthy foods to him on a Saturday morning. And then, I don't like segmentation. I hate personas. So personas are like bad versions of segmentations, particularly when there's no research to back them up. And this, again, I found this randomly on the internet. So here's a persona. So the first group, Mike. Mike works as a graphic designer in a small agency. So this is clearly the author of this piece, or the boyfriend of the author of this piece, because first of all, it's small graphic design agencies that use personas. You always find the author in any kind of persona work you can do. He uses Twitter to post updates about what he's up to with his project work. But again, if he was at Sapient, we'd fire him for that, because we often try and hire people who are tweeting about competitive work that we want to know more about. So we go and interview them to find out more about the work. So again, designers are not allowed to tweet about project work. So again, not a very good, useful thing. The second group, Zoe, she's studying a master's in international development, unsure of what the future lies. So first thing is, all young people unsure about the future. The first bit, really specific, a master's in international development. There must be 50 people in the UK that would be studying for that. So a typical of persona is a really specific insight that applies to about 4 people, and then some vague statement that applies to everyone. And again, no research coming through. She uploads and tags photos and videos from places she's been to with her friends. Who does that here? Only people like her, okay? And then finally, she regularly text messages her friends to find out if they've heard about a new pop-up shop. She's basically part of the pop-up shop police. She is looking for pop-up shops, giving out flyers. Again, very specific thing. And then finally, Jeff. Jeff was so boring, I had to replace his picture with Idris Elba to make him look cooler. And basically, he's got 2 young kids at home, a baby and a toddler. He's now saying to his wife, this is the time to move house. If I had done that, I would have been thrown out of that house just when you're having new babies. It's kind of the last thing. So clearly whoever wrote this doesn't have kids. And then he wants a phone because he wants to email, surf the web, use apps, and take photos and video. Okay, so how do we design things for him? How could we do that? What could we do that would fit this weird guy who does these things? So most personas are a waste of time, right? When you look at them in the broad light of day, they're not very useful. You want the most people possible to buy your products or services. So designing for kind of discrete things like masters and international development is just putting you off the focus of trying to make it work for everyone. So if you bring these three things together, the more you do something, the more likely you are to do it again. The longer it takes, the less likely it's ever to happen. And a lot of customers are unprofitable, and only few are very profitable. You've backwards invented RFV, which has been around since the 70s. And catalogue shops invented this in the 60s, Littlewoods and K's in the UK. You can't get 100% Terylene products anymore. The only place you would find them are on the marina, because that's what they make yacht sails with now. If anyone is wearing Terylene, move away from everyone else because you're a fire risk. It's 100% non-breathable, sweatable materials. But these guys were knew these things in the 70s. There's nothing new about anything I've shown you. It's all been known for 40 years. And actually, if you want a segmentation, you just use recency, frequency, and value. And you divide people into high and low for each of the three things. 3 times 3 to the power, 2 to the power 3 is 8. 8 groups. And it's always the same 8 groups, and you can just immediately start working on these. You've got your best customers, you want to milk them for as much money as you can and protect them, because they're very likely to buy from you already. We already worked that out. So don't ever discount to them, just try and get more money. The 2 groups of the battlefield are the people who used to be your best customers and now have stopped buying from you. You need to win them back because they've got a proven history and the future value of them is nothing. And new customers, because we can change the behavior of new customers. These guys ignore them. These guys continue, but this is where the battleground is. So never buy segmentation. That segmentation I showed you earlier probably cost someone $750,000. I could do this in 2 minutes on anyone's data set. And you're already 80% of the way there for what they did. Number 5, never trust a ratio. They get faster now. NPS, who loves NPS? I think it's about 90% bullshit. I think it's useful in some situations. So Bain created Net Promoter Score, Freddie Reichhold. On their website, this is how they sell Net Promoter Score. They say that it correlates with organic growth. So this is obviously their best example of Net Promoter Score working because it's on their website. And what you see is Midwest region organic deposit growth for banks. So that's quite a specific group of banks. It's just Midwest banks and just their account openings. It also ends at 2007. Can anyone think what might have happened to the finance industry in 2008 that you might want to cut off at that point? I don't know. As an analyst, I'm always looking for how to chart the figures. But the killer here is they measured NPS after the growth. What they're trying to say to you is Net Promoter Scores predict future growth. But what they did was they measured Net Promoter Score after the growth and then applied it back. This is correlation and causality the wrong way round. A bit like jail causes criminals. You know, that's what they're saying. This is a multi-million-dollar company flogging NPS based on flawed logic that no one has ever really poked around and said, hold on a minute, this doesn't add up. The second problem I have is ROI. So the tyranny of ROI in marketing makes us do lots of stupid things. It's the worst thing that could ever happen to us, a single metric that determines success or failure. Lots of great work doesn't have a high ROI. And the problem with ROI is it's only a measure of efficiency. It doesn't measure payback or profit, which are the things that we want to generate. So a small project with a high ROI sometimes looks better than a big project with a low ROI, but the big project probably makes more money. So in marketing, we need to stop maximizing ROI and start minimizing ROI to an agreeable level. So if our agreeable level is 3-to-1 or 2-to-1, and our current ROI is 5, just keep pumping more money into that activity until you bring it down to 2-to-1. That's how you maximize profit. ROI, taken simplistically, is a cause of many dumb decisions that limits your profit. Number 6, algorithms. So what we're seeing now with the complexity of data is we have subbed analytics to algorithms. We've subbed things to robots now. This is quite a fun time to be an analyst, but it's also a worrying time. And be careful what you let your analysts do. So anyone remember Facebook Year in Review? They took all your photos, then gave you a front cover based on their algorithm and to predict what would be the best part of your year and say, hey James, here's what your year looked like, your apartment burned down. Now, Facebook didn't set out to try and upset people, but when you're doing an algorithm to predict the best front cover for everyone, there's going to be 1% of people it doesn't work for, and it might be irrelevant. Or worst, it might actually be bad. And there were examples of dead loved ones, dead pets being put on the front cover just because they did it off, likes and shares and comments. without thinking through some of these things. It's a problem with algorithms. Algorithms don't think, they don't have any ethics. They just kind of produce the right result, or not. The random darknet, who's in charge of darknet shopping here, or dark web advertising? No? Big growth next year. I'm hoping there's a dark web Cannes. Neil, do you think we could put in for that? So a group of artists from UK and Switzerland, they created a robot that every week it would buy something for $100 from the dark web, and then they put it on display in Switzerland in an art installation. And at the end of the project, the robot was confiscated by the police. And a big moral question came up. Who's to blame? Is it the programmers or the robot? Now, clearly, of course, it's the programmers because they told it to go on the dark web and buy something. But imagine if we had a robot that was optimizing our marketing, but it was self-learning. It had artificial intelligence. And all of a sudden, it made decisions to go on the dark web and start putting display banners. I don't know if you can put display banners on the dark web, but putting display banners on the dark web with your marketing budget because it worked out that was the right thing to do. Who's legally responsible for that, breaking the law? Again, we're not ready. We don't have the laws, and we don't have the controls in place to manage these things. So my favorite example, so it bought loads of fake Nikes, had a Hungarian passport, had some ecstasy tabs. We had ecstasy tabs earlier on. My favorite part about this is in your own post rooms, in your own offices, if anyone is getting DVDs into your post room, they're probably ecstasy tabs, not DVD. No one's getting DVDs through the post anymore. The giveaway is this thing, like, no, iTunes, Netflix, no one's getting this delivered to their office. So if you see your colleague keeps getting lots of DVDs delivered, they're probably on the dark web buying drugs. Don't quote me on that, but you should investigate. In the UK in the 90s, we had a brand called Sheila's Wheels. And with Sheila's Wheels, basically they offered female drivers a lower premium because female drivers are safer, they make less claims on their insurance, and they wanted to pass that benefit on to consumers. So using data analytics, we can work out a segment of the audience that we can offer lower prices to and build a brand around it. But the EU in 2012 said you're not allowed to price discriminate by gender. So even though we knew we could offer lower premiums, we're not allowed to discriminate. So that's an example where a law is forbidding us to use the knowledge that we have for the purpose. Again, that's an ethical question, not an analytical question. So I mentioned before about affairs. WhatsApp, used in nearly half of divorce cases in Italy, are quoted now. I think Facebook in the US is something similar. It's like 40% or something. So who would have thought when everyone's on WhatsApp here that this could be used in a court case at some stage to take your kids away? But that's what we're seeing. And this is the best advert I've ever seen for WhatsApp. If WhatsApp want to enter this next year for a Cannes Lion, I think this is the best advertising ever. It said, "We have seen adulterers using the service to maintain 3 or 4 relationships. It's like dynamite." Put it out there on a big billboard. There's your campaign. They just need to monetize the platform a bit better. So getting toward the end now, in marketing, there are very few consequences of getting marketing wrong. We're not dropping cooling rods into a nuclear reactor. We're doing marketing, and therefore the consequences aren't very high. So 1988 Olympic final, 6 of the 8 guys were at some stage or other tested positive for drugs. The thing about professional sports is they can't afford to say someone's guilty and it not to be true because they would sue the professional body, the sport would no longer exist. So I asked a load of my friends, who's the most famous high-profile sportsman who has been tested for positive for drugs and isn't guilty? Now, a lot of my friends in Austin say Lance Armstrong, and of course he is guilty. There's no two ways about that, Greg. Can't get out of that. But it's very rare you find it because the test is optimized to catch real cheats. And therefore there are no false positives, what we call a type 1 error. There are no false positives in drug testing, but that means there are loads of false negatives. So you could be tested 200 times and come negative every time because the test is about not falsely accusing someone. And the only person we found was Deanne Modell's a UK runner, English runner. She got tested positive. She had to retire. She successfully sued the organization. They kept her sample at 37 degrees for like 3 days before they tested it. I don't know if any of you keep urine around the house at 37 degrees, but if you do, it doesn't look much like urine after 3 days. It's ammonia by that stage. So, of course, the drug test didn't work after 3 days. So she's the only person that's really proven to not be a cheat. On a slightly more serious topic, the other way, UK has one of the biggest breast screening programs in the world. And the test for breast cancer is all about no false negatives. So not missing someone who does have potential cancer and then they might go on to die. Mortality is a big thing. Therefore, there are more people with false positives. So more people get told they have positive tests and they have invasive surgery. So not only the trauma of being told, but then the surgery itself happens to ensure that no one gets through on the other side. Now, not all countries in the world have the same breast screening programs. It costs billions of dollars every year. And so there's been lots of research into how effective this is in terms of stopping cancer. Cancer Research UK did a study, and what they found was for every 5 lives that were saved, 17 women will have treatment that they don't need. And that's the direct quote to Cancer Research UK. So this is not, I can't answer this as an analyst, whether that's the right ratio. This is an ethical question. And this is the danger that we're getting into with analytics now. We're getting into places where your humble data analyst has any capability to answer the questions about whether this. And this is the most serious thing I could find to kind of make the point. Most things in marketing are far more trivial than this. But these are the point where your analysts are struggling to deal with the ethical dilemma of being that capitalist and making profit. So the problem with marketing is lack of consequences. We have spam, we have junk mail, we have people who thrust leaflets in our faces on the streets, and no one can seem to stop any of these things. Marketing is largely self-regulated, and as a consequence, the regulations aren't very tight. So there's lots of bad marketing out there that is allowed on both sides. And then finally, policing the police. I talked a bit earlier on about the legislation not keeping up. This is a huge problem for us at the moment in terms of keeping up with privacy acts and security. In the UK, the police look like this. So when I first did this presentation in Texas, the police don't look like this in Texas, do they, Greg? But this is what the police do in the UK. They take pictures of the royal family normally. Not in Scotland anymore, I don't think. But so this is what the police do. But we have stop and search in the UK, like most countries. And so stop and search gives the police the most autonomy to choose who they want to stop. They don't have to look like anyone's committing a crime. They can just go and stop someone. A Section 60 stop and search. And what you see is that 87% of the population is white in the UK. 41% of searches are done on that white population, but 59% of the arrests. Now again, I can't comment on the ethics of who to stop, but you can clearly see that police are using a form of racial profiling, but actually it's not working because more white people are more likely to be arrested as a consequence of a search than others. So again, coming up with segments or personas that are then used, creates potentially negative mindsets in people who are making decisions on the front line. Again, this is not analytics, this is ethics, and not something covered. But it clearly looks something is wrong from those numbers. And it's probably true the world over. And the problem we have, one of the biggest ethical dilemmas we have at the moment, is the trade-off between security and freedom, particularly around data. So there was this headline from the Daily Mail, the Mail Online, that said GCHQ, which is our equivalent of the NRS, everyone's upset that they're spying on disgruntled employees turning into terrorists. The most frightening part of this article is actually that Facebook, the Mail Online has 2.5 million Facebook fans. That's ridiculous and scary. But on the other side, we have teenage girls going to Syria in the UK, and people are complaining, why weren't they stopped? Whole families have gone since, and so why weren't they stopped at the airport? We can't have both things. You can't have freedom and security. It's a kind of a trade-off. And the problem is, particularly with politicians, is that public opinion vacillates day by day. We just had a general election in the UK. No one campaigned on this because public opinion was moving around too quickly. No one could take a side because tomorrow that might be the wrong side of the argument. So again, these ethical and moral dilemmas are a huge issue for us in marketing when we're trying to chase profit and not thinking about ethics. And then finally, really, where the hell is this plane? If we've got so much data, if you believe Edward Snowden that say governments know everything about you, where the hell is this plane? It's completely disappeared. It's been over a year now, and there is no sign of it. So whilst people might think that data is all powerful, there are still massive gaps in knowledge and understanding. It's still very limited in what we can do, and marketing is very limited again within that. So I think in summary, before I say thank you, there are 4 points really. In data analytics, there are things that we know to be true. The more you do something, the more likely you are to do it again. That will never change. That will always be the case. There are also things that we know that we do today that probably aren't true. Segmentation, personas, NPS, misusing ROI. These are all things that we should challenge and be cynical and skeptical about. Then there are things that we shouldn't know. Things about breast screening, or things that we shouldn't be dabbling with that from a statistical perspective. We should think about the ethical, moral dilemma of that. And then there are things that we just don't know, particularly around like where's the plane, about security. There are big gaps in our knowledge. So I think if you pull those 4 things together, there is some predictability out there, but some of the predictable stuff is wrong, and some of the things that we're still yet to learn. So thanks very much.